Yes, kids, your teacher is an arrogant idiot. Hey, welcome back to the Colorblind Architect Podcast. I'm your host, David. And okay, so maybe the title's a little bit clickbaity. Yes, I'm not necessarily saying that all teachers are idiots or arrogant. It's more just a way to start off the conversation about one of the problems that you have in schools and especially universities is this tendency of the smart idiot. Professors in specific. And I can speak to this matter. Why? Because I've got a freaking master's degree. I've been through university. I've experienced it. I've experienced what it means to go as a young person thinking that the people that you're going to be learning from are these great, wise, and intelligent people, only to discover that they weren't as smart as you thought. Now, this isn't to say that all of them are that way. So let me back up and just explain. Why do I bring this up? Well, I think we have this tendency in our culture to just assume that if somebody has a position of power or honor or prestige, like a doctor or a lawyer or a president or a professor, we kind of just give them credence without really questioning their credentials. So, what about their credentials? Okay, let's say somebody has a Harvard degree. Great, wonderful. That means you spent a ton of money for a piece of paper. Well, does it mean more than that? Maybe. It doesn't necessarily, though. See, here's the problem. When you go and get a college degree, it can be a really good thing for you. As for me, it has been an extremely beneficial thing to have a college degree. It's helped me become a licensed architect, of which I've been able to be, moderately successful. I mean, I obviously have a lot of flaws and a lot of weaknesses in that, but it's definitely helped. So, what got me thinking about this topic then is when I think back to when I was in school, and especially in architecture school, I remember kind of with, like glazed eyes, being excited, as a young student, thinking, yeah, man, this is great. I'm in architecture school. This is what I've always wanted to do, and I'm learning what I want to learn. And then slowly over time, there starts being this little, how do I say, mental incongruity, right? It's not everything seems like it's fitting in. And so at first you think it's just you, like especially when I had a couple professors trying to explain, various philosophers or thinkers, especially, especially some of the 1970s postmodern French philosophers. And I kept thinking, is there something wrong with me? That I'm not getting this, that I'm not understanding it. And it seemed like the rest of the class was just lapping it up like, oh yeah, this is great. This is great. And so here I am, a young person thinking, oh, there must be something wrong with me that I I think that this stuff is a bunch of bull. It's only later as I grew and I learned as an adult, and now being a middle-aged person with a lot of experience now under my belt, I look back and I realize, wow, those professors pushing some of those crazy ideas, they were freaking morons. They didn't know what the heck they were talking about, but they sure did act like they did. They were arrogant idiots. And that's where the title of the episode came. Now, does this mean all of them were? No, actually, my thesis chairman, he was fantastic. In fact, he was very dismissive of a lot of these newer ideas, these supposedly fancy, philosophical thought structures that were trying to be pushed in the university. And like I said, I didn't think much about it at the time. I just thought it was me not understanding it. And as time has gone on, you start realizing how much of the academic ideas being pushed by some of the pseudo-intellectuals um, in collegiate spaces, how much of them are just idiots. They don't actually know what the heck they're talking about, or they might just be evil. Maybe. That's my thought. I'm assuming that they're just idiots, because I can't imagine that anybody goes into a space and tries to push for something that is objectively false. Now, part of my incongruity that I was feeling throughout this time had to do with the fact that I've always been a big believer in truth. I've always tried to push for the truth. And so when you come across philosophical ideas that they have elements of truth, but there's this feeling that you get, it's this slight feeling where it's like, this is wrong. Couldn't put my finger on it at the time, but it was wrong. I knew it was wrong. And even though I felt like an idiot for not understanding it, thinking maybe this is just a higher order of sophistication that I just don't understand. And see, I think that's how these pseudo-intellectual theories gain traction. Nobody wants to admit that they don't understand it. So they all just kind of play along and pretend. They all just play along and pretend like, oh, of course a man can have a period. Yeah, because that's now, fortunately, I didn't have to face that kind of falsehood during my time in university, but I did have to deal with deconstructivism. Well, deconstructivism is an interesting theory, and it's an interesting philosophy in that it tries to deconstruct everything. Now, on the one hand, from an architectural perspective, I can totally understand how it has value, because if you take something that we accept as just the way things are done, and then you start deconstructing it into all of its separate parts and then rebuilding it from scratch, it allows you to rebuild from scratch. And so that particular theory actually has some merit in the architectural world. Now, the problem is you take that into societal things, it can, if you try to deconstruct society, you can actually end up doing more harm if you don't know what you're doing. In Jordan Peterson's latest book, Beyond Order, he talks about don't deconstruct things, don't tear things apart that you don't fully understand. For example, society. We've got these institutions, these structures of our democratic republic. In the United States, we have definitely one of the most fantastic constitutions that forms the foundation of our government. It's protected us in so many ways from corruption and just nightmarish people um, over the course of time. And it's helped us to actually become one of the most integrated and inclusive societies on the planet. And even though there's people trying to argue the opposite case, people try to argue, oh, well, America's just so racist, and that's why we had the George Floyd riots last year, and all blah, 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 blah. You know what? Travel. Get out of this country. Go to other countries throughout the world, and you'll discover that racism and bigotry, it exists everywhere. It is a human condition, has nothing to do with Americanism. Americanism is not racist. There has been a racist past in America, but it was not because of the way that the fundamental foundation of the Constitution, the fundamental framing of the Constitution, was actually a beautifully inspired document forming the basis for the most successful society the world has ever known. Now, bring that back to intellectual, academic pursuits. Don't be afraid to question your professors. Now, if there's any young people listening to me, which I doubt because I'm just some curmudgeon on the YouTube or the Rumble, I don't know how to what's it called? Um, I forget. I don't even remember uh, what the name of some of these other social medias are, like Snapchat or whatever. I don't freaking care about those because I find them stupid. I do like long form videos like this that explain things because I like to think. All right. I listen to a lot of Jordan Peterson, a lot of other great thinkers like Brett Weinstein and, various others. There's a lot of really great thinkers out there on the internet that you can listen to in long form on YouTube and on Rumble. And it's great because now all of a sudden you have real discussion and you're not just assuming that the person knows what the heck they're talking about because anybody, I mean, just take a look at me. I mean, I've got an iPhone and an internet connection and I'm posting this video. Anybody can post stuff, right? So what gives me my credentials? Well, I could say, oh, well, I've got a master's degree. That's just a piece of paper. That's meaningless. It's as meaningless as a vaccine passport. It's just a piece of paper. Papers, please. Right? That's what the Gestapo used to say. Papers, please. During the Nazi regime in Germany. Well, it also happened in communism. It still happens in communism in China and in North Korea. There's still people, they have to present their papers to be able to go travel from one town to another. And now we're talking about doing that with vaccine passports. Now, so papers, like I said, it's worth the paper that they're printed on, that they're meaningless without actual fundamental truths behind them, right? Principles are much more important than legislation. And so when I talk about these professors, if you're a young person and you're going into college or even in high school, or look, be respectful, obviously. You don't want to be like, you don't want to be trolling your teacher, but at the same time, you should be questioning them. Question everything that doesn't make sense. Question everything that seems a little bit off. Okay? Don't be afraid. Question it. What's the worst that could happen? Now, here's the thing. If you are honest in your pursuit and you're questioning, if it's a good teacher, then they're going to like the questions and they're actually going to try to help you find the answers. And they're going to investigate those questions with you. Now, if they're if they're an arrogant idiot teacher, like the title of this video, well, then they're going to try to shut you down and say that you're a troublemaker. If you discover that is your teacher, then your teacher is an arrogant idiot, and you need to just do the best you can. Now, if it's early enough in the semester, go ahead and drop that class, switch sections to maybe a different teacher. Try to find a way to get out of that class. Now, if it's too late to get out of that class, then yeah, definitely. Suffer your way through it. Put in the hard work. Make sure you get the best grade that you can. And just realize that you're not going to be able to have the honest intellectual development that you were hoping on having with that particular teacher, because that teacher is an arrogant idiot. Now, to any professors or teachers listening, value truth above all. Value truth above all. And if you have a student who's honestly questioning, if they are honestly trying to find out the truth of the way things work, well, then you should be also encouraging that growth and that development and respecting their questions enough to try to do your best to help them find the truth. Don't necessarily just give them the answer, though. How about give them different works to read? Give them different philosophers to read, different books. Give them more reading assignments. If they're honestly seeking truth, guess what? They're going to read it and they're going to thank you for it later. I had many professors when I was going through university. They challenged me. They gave me the reading assignments. They gave me extra work to do. And I read those things. You know why? Because I was very curious. I wanted to know. And so that should be true academic pursuit, not trying to lay down some kind of doctrine of, oh, well, this is the accepted truth. Accepted truth is a bunch of BS, okay? There's truth and there's truth. There's anything else is opinion, okay? If you say the largely accepted or the mainstream position or the consensus, oh my goodness, that is one of the ones that just makes me go wild when you hear this idea of, oh, well, the scientific consensus is, well, that's all great and good, but you know what? Before Albert Einstein came up with the theory of relativity, there were a lot of scientific consensuses that were just plain wrong. Before Galileo figured out that the Earth was rotating around the sun, the scientific consensus was that the Earth was flat and that the sun rotated around the Earth. Okay? So the scientific consensus is meaningless horse manure. Okay? Consensus doesn't exist in science. Science is truth. There's truth, right? That's all there is. And we might have a consensus on what we believe the truth to be. That is what's called a theory. And even gravity is called a theory, the theory of gravity. Why do we call it the theory of gravity? Well, we've got really good evidence and a large body of scientific research that tells us that gravity is, and this is how it functions. But it's still a theory, you know why? Because we don't have an absolute understanding of how it works. Nor do we have an absolute proof that it even exists. We're pretty dang sure it exists, but we don't have an absolute proof. Same thing with God, right? You can neither prove nor disprove God. That's why we usually leave the question of God outside of the realm of science, because it is impossible to know. If you have somebody trying to claim that they know for a fact that science has proven that God doesn't exist, well, then you can say, okay, well, then prove it. Where's your theorem? Where's your where's your scientific research? Show me the work. And I'm happy to study it with you. I'm happy to study if somebody tries to scientifically prove God, and I'll also question them. In fact, even if somebody tries to say that gravity doesn't exist, I'm glad to entertain the theory. Okay, well, let's see your work. Show me your work. Prove it to me. Because, yeah, maybe I could be wrong. Things that we think are accurate could be wrong. So that's kind of the way that you tell the difference between a good and bad professor, a good and bad teacher, is, are they willing to question the dogma? Are they willing to do as the teacher portrayed by Robin Williams in Dead Poets Society? Are they willing to question the orthodoxy and the dogma of the institution and bring about free-thinking individuals out of their students? That is a good teacher. A bad teacher is one that reinforces dogma, reinforces the doctrines of orthodoxy. We shouldn't be ever accepting doctrines of orthodoxy. We shouldn't be ever accepting dogma or ideology as being fact. With one exception. Communism is evil. It always has been, and it always will be. That is one thing that I will always stand by. However, that's just one example. There's obviously going to be others. Just give me a break, okay? I'm not perfect. Anyways, hopefully you're questioning everything. Maybe you're even questioning me. And if so, put a comment down below. Maybe, I don't freaking care if you do or not. I'll try to respond if I see something worth responding to. I don't get very many comments other than, my son constantly complaining about my really crappy thumbnails. But that's okay. He's questioned me. And as much as it's a little bit annoying, I also think of the fact that I was the same kind of hellraiser when I was growing up. I questioned everything, and I love that my son is questioning me. And that's the way it should be. There should be questioning. Just because I'm his dad doesn't make me the Lord and ruler over the house. Now, hopefully he's going to obey me. And hopefully I live and act in a way that causes him to want to listen to my counsel. But ultimately, I want him to govern himself. And that's the other thing about being a teacher. If you're going to be a good teacher, you need to teach your students to govern themselves, not to be governed. It's an important distinction there. See, the weak, the stupid, they think it's all about command and control. You've got to lay down the law, and you've got to make sure that people abide by the law. And let's make sure, you have to wear your mask. You have to get your vaccine. Okay, well, here's the way I see it. Treat me like an adult. Give me the information that you think I might not know, I'll process that information and I'll make up a decision for myself. I'll govern myself accordingly. If I believe what you're telling me is true, then you should have nothing to fear. But if you are a weak leader, a feckless leader, one who is insecure in your position because you don't actually have the fortitude to govern, then you are going to be very concerned about what people do. Why? Because you think that you need to control them, because if you don't, you feel like you're lesser of a leader. A truly great leader doesn't control anybody. A truly great leader, they just simply teach good principles and let the people govern themselves. So I believe in vaccines. I have all my vaccines except for the flu shot and the COVID vaccine. Now, I had COVID, so I feel like I'm covered at least for a while. I survived it, so that means I should have some antibodies in my bloodstream that are protecting me against it and hopefully preventing me from carrying it as well and spreading it. However, on the flip side, yeah, I recognize if I go onto an airplane, there's always a chance that if I pass somebody and catch, something and carry it, even if I don't exhibit symptoms, I understand that. And so if I go on an airplane, I am most certainly going to wear a mask because I believe that even without COVID, that is an incubator for a bunch of illnesses. So I govern myself accordingly. Now, most of the time I don't wear a mask. Why? Because I think it's stupid to wear a mask in places where you're highly unlikely to pass any kind of respiratory virus. I say that not as somebody who's an epidemiologist or a scientist in those regards, but I have taken enough science classes throughout high school and college, and I've done enough study on my own to understand the basic principles, right? And that's something that you can do too. We all can do it. We're all adults, right? And that's the point that I'm trying to make, is that good teachers teach principles and then let the student govern themselves. It is not the teacher's responsibility to make sure that every one of their students gets an A. Why would it, right? You're going to have different grades, right? Oh, but that's unfair. Why? If somebody doesn't do the work, if they don't do the study, if they don't learn the material, then why should they get an A when somebody else does all the work and they earn the A? And more importantly, why should the teacher force somebody to get a better grade if they didn't earn it? That's not the teacher's job. The teacher's job is to provide the material, the educational material to the students and help them ingest it as best they can. But ultimately, it's the student's responsibility to learn, not the teacher. So a good teacher is not going to force a failing student to do better. They're not going to try. They're going to do the best they can with the students that they have. And like I said, if some of your students suck, that's on the students. I mean, obviously, you got to try. You got to try as a teacher. Now, obviously, I'm not a teacher. So that's your thing. Anyways, I've gone way longer than I expected again. It's like I seem to enjoy pontificating. Imagine that. Yeah. hopefully this has been a helpful discussion. Hopefully you've learned something. And hey, until next time, I'm the colorblind architect. Peace out.